I want to wish everyone a good afternoon. My name is Tim Newbert. I am the Executive Director of the American Association for Employment and Education. On behalf of the AAE Board Member and Director of Professional Development, Neil Otto, it's my pleasure to welcome you to another webinar hosted by our organization. Today's topic is Reimagine Hiring, PK-12 Recruiting Discussion. Please allow me to cover just a few housekeeping matters before we begin with today's topic. During the webinar, all attendees will be muted by default. However, today's settings will allow you to activate your video and, if desired, unmute your microphone to ask questions or share comments. You may also use the chat feature within Zoom. When using chat, you are encouraged to change the recipient default to all presenters and attendees to maximize participation. This webinar is being recorded and will be made available to attendees and AAE members. If you are not currently a member of AAE, please visit our website, aaee.org, for more information. We are a professional association intent on positively impacting education through professional connections. Related to that mission, we connect the three critical groups involved with preparation, recruitment, and retention of pre-K through 12 educators, university professionals and others who prepare educators, school system professionals and others who recruit, hire, and retain them, and of course, educator candidates themselves. We offer annual publications such as the Job Search Handbook for Educators. We conduct an educator supply and demand survey each fall and winter, resulting in a spring report. We host a pre-K through 12 job board and calendar of education job fairs held around the country. We host webinars such as this one on topics relevant to our membership. We sponsor teacher scholarships and school system mini grants to support teacher pipelines. We host teacher job fairs, both in-person and virtual. And we host an annual conference and education career fair each fall. Our next event will be held in Louisville, Kentucky from October 26th through October 28th. Joining me today are Daniel Johnson and Baltazar Benavides from Education Elements. During this session, Daniel and Baltazar will facilitate a discussion on reimagining pre-K through 12 recruiting. Hiring and retaining high-quality educators is an immense challenge that has been complicated by the pandemic. The past year has changed both employer and employee expectations and needs. As we plan for the year ahead, taking the time to define your candidate profile is a critical first step to helping you find candidates who will be a good fit with your school district now and in the future. Together, we'll talk about how to create your candidate profile and why it matters now more than ever. Thanks for joining us today, Daniel and Baltazar. I'll now turn it over to you.
Thanks, Tim, and thank you everyone for being here this afternoon. We apologize about the tech hiccup. We are actually running this series in two different venues, so certainly this is the first round, and that may have caused a little bit of confusion. So thank you for being here. And we'd love to start off with some introductions and get a sense of who's in the room. So we'll also just practice using the chat feature here as a form of dialogue as we go through this discussion event this afternoon. So if you could share your name, if it's not district, just your organization, your role, and then a check-in question of what is your criteria for picking a restaurant? And for me, right now it's prioritizing outdoor seating, where I am has done a great job of converting a lot of the restaurant spaces into outdoor seating. So looking for places that are doing a good job with that. And we'll give you a moment here to add into the chat, again, name, organization, role, and criteria. We'll take the next 60 seconds or so for people to add. And thanks, Baltazar, for kicking us off as well.
I followed suit from Tim, too. I'm a +1 on that. Good craft beers on tap are always a plus.
Ah, yes, yes. Thanks, Ashley. Great to have you here, and certainly reviews. And if it's Jacques or Jack, thank you for being here as well. Something new, supporting local. Thanks, Monica. Kansas City, I'm a Jayhawk, so glad to have you here today.
Oh, so sorry. No. We're on the
No.
Missouri sides.
It's a 50-50. I took a gamble there. I
No,
failed.
Sorry. MIZ all the way.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear
Although
that.
we do recruit our Jayhawks. We gotta love them for that. So.
Wow. Well, thanks for being here, and yeah, we'll keep the border rivalry aside for today.
You get it.
And thank you, Robin, Casey, Christine, Nicole. Thank you all for sharing out as well, scoping out the menu in advance. Absolutely. So thank you, everyone, for kicking off here. You know, some common responses we typically hear in this share out: reviews, the types of food or the beer offerings, the recommendations of others, maybe the location. We each have unique qualifiers when it comes to the restaurants and the foods that we select. Today, we're going to be talking about how clarifying your criteria as an organization and really your candidate criteria can act as a foundation for improving recruitment, hiring, onboarding, development, and ultimately long-term challenges around retention. So good way to start us off here and get to know you a little bit, learn where you're from and a little bit about you. So thank you for entertaining that check-in. As Tim said, we want to treat this as a discussion series, so perfect modeling there. Please come off mute and share out if you kind of you want to keep yourself on mute while we are sharing, just in case you have background noise. But we certainly encourage. This is a really small group, so do not hesitate to just chime in or use the chat feature as a way to silently do that as well. We encourage any type of share out. We'd love to see your video on, although understand if circumstances don't allow that or that's not a preference for you this afternoon. And of course, just ask any questions or share any thoughts as we go. We find that really helpful for us as facilitators to make sure we're speaking to the things that are top of mind. We're going to keep this really brief here. So education elements, who we are. We are an education consultancy. We have more than 10 years of experience. We've worked in more than 1,000 schools and districts. I think we're in 40 plus states at this point. So we're really a nationally based firm. We support schools, districts, and state organizations, some associations, with building more responsive systems. Today, we're going to be sharing perspective on teacher recruitment and retention, some of the work and perspective that we're advancing in school systems right now. And we just encourage you to follow us or reach out if anything from today inspires you. And I'll go ahead and I think one easy way to do that is if you like what you hear, or there's anything today that you find relevant, follow our blog. You'll get maybe a bi-weekly set of resources from us, and that'll be related to, again, things we talk about here today and other areas we're thinking a lot about as well. So if you like what you hear, please follow our blog. And then just some quick introductions. My name is Daniel Johnson. As Tim shared, I'm an associate partner with Ed Elements. I'm based in Washington, D.C. I worked in school systems in Mississippi and New York City, and as mentioned, am a very proud Jayhawk. I am a former middle and high school science teacher. That's my background in the classroom. And I've spent the last 7 years doing consulting work with Education Elements, with school districts on blended and personalized instruction, long-term district strategic planning, and of course, what we're going to be talking about today, teacher recruitment and retention. And I'll hand it over to Baltazar for an introduction as well.
Hey everybody, my name is Baltazar Benavides, originally from Houston, Texas, and currently living here in the nice heat of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. I am a former teacher as well. I spent 6 years teaching and coaching in Maryland, first in PG County outside DC, and then in Baltimore City. And for the last 3 years, I've been a part of the Education Elements team, working with districts all over the map and thinking about their approach to instruction, especially with a special focus on personalized learning, also with long-term strategic planning, and of course on this content as well, thinking about teacher retention and recruitment. Very excited to be with you all today.
Thanks, Balto. And we will go ahead and get started here. These dates are incorrect. Well, I'll clarify. This is meant to be a 3-part series. Each part's gonna stand alone, but also build on the topic. So if you like what we talk about today, or you're intrigued for what's coming next, we hope that you'll join us again. We're actually running this series in 2 venues on our Ed Elements platform, and also in partnership with AAEE. So these dates are actually the Ed Elements dates. Tim, maybe in the chat we can drop in the AAEE event dates, and I apologize for the mix up there, but we'll have those updated with when you can join it through the association. This is a 3-part series. We are, as Tim mentioned, exploring ways to redesign your hiring process, from selecting the right candidates to the way that informs your interviewing and your onboarding. So we'll really talk from start to end of the early candidate and teacher experience. And today our subject is around targeting talent. So a few objectives for our next 40 minutes or so together. We're going to share some key considerations for developing your candidate profiles and how they can drive your recruitment process. We're going to talk about best practices within that candidate profile development. And we hope to create some discussion around your shared experiences as well as ours with this work. A few guiding questions that we think about. So what you see here on the right is how we think about the life cycle, the employee life cycle of a teacher, from the moment they are attracted to your organization, formally recruited, onboarded, developed, and ultimately empowered or promoted through your organization. And what we think about at Elements is really how do you create a sense of belonging at every step of the way. So a lot of the work that we do is helping districts and schools answer that question and develop systems to increase the sense of belonging wherever teachers are along that journey. So 3 guiding questions for the phase that we're going to be talking about in this series, which is the recruit phase. How well does your interview process evaluate top competencies, develop connection and community, and ensure equitable access and assessment? How aligned are the different levels of your organization on this process? And how well does your process match the role of an educator today, particularly as we come out of a year with the pandemic?
So, oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, and Balta's going to take us through the next portion.
Too eager to jump in, y'all. Too eager to jump in. So why candidate profiles, and specifically, why are we talking about them right now? I want to first talk about why we think about candidate profiles on the front end. And there's 3 criteria that I want to point to speak on why this is such a good, important piece to any recruitment and hiring process. The first being objectivity. The candidate profile is your starting point for how to create measures that all of your candidates can be evaluated against when you're thinking about who belongs in these spots within your district, within your system, within your organization. And it helps create that equal opportunity for all candidates. By no means does creating a candidate profile remove all elements of bias. That takes an endless and consistent approach across the entire system, but it is a very important first step. The second piece is around success. Hiring is a short-term shared process, and it is intended to support long-term shared success, both for those candidates who end up in your organization and for the larger organization. So we want to find those new hires who are going to fit within that role and be successful, but we also want to make sure that role is the right fit for those new hires so that they can grow throughout our organization and contribute long-term to its growth. Lastly, timing, and Daniel spoke to an important note about this, but especially given the shifts in education over the last year, how do we ensure that the competencies we think are required to be successful in the roles we're hiring for truly are the ones that are important and essential to make sure that those who fill those positions are going to be successful? How do we keep up with the changing needs of the roles, the teams of education, and how do we make sure our system is prepared to sort out candidates who truly meet those updated needs? I also want to speak to a couple considerations that we want to keep in mind when we're thinking about building candidate profiles. And we'll share this information, so I'm not going to touch on all of these here. But I'd like to share first about the opportunity that building a candidate profile provides you to audit your existing hiring process and ensure that you are measuring your candidates against that existing candidate profile. Because we've seen a lot of systems start anchored to a criteria and come back 6 months later, a year later, 3 years later. Those systems start to become so handed down and baton passed that no longer are they an effective measure for what they initially were drafted for that position. So it is an important opportunity for audit. The second thing I want to point to here is the team. What resources do you need to include when you are defining or redefining your candidate profile for this position? It's a great opportunity to include stakeholders beyond any one silo or department of your organization to make sure there's greater alignment and consistent communication around what these positions look like. Again, avoiding some of that lost in translation baton pass that can happen over time. The third piece on here I want to point to is alignment, making sure that we're not just building a profile for hire and that's the end of the finish line, right? We say, great, we've got these positions, they're filled, we're done. And then somebody picks them up and says, okay, welcome, this is how we do things here. But more importantly, how do we think about a consistent experience from candidate to new hire to long-term member of our team so that that hiring criteria, the onboarding attention we pay to them, and the long-term development they receive truly is aligned across all those systems. And then lastly, relevance, right? To what extent do these competencies need to be updated given the changing needs of the position or the role that we're looking at? Why now? Again, we know that we are coming out of an unprecedented year in education, and we've got another one ahead of us. There are some articles linked here from Chalkbeat on this next slide that kind of speak to a lot of the conversation that's out there. A lot of people saying, you know, teachers are leaving faster than ever. Some saying, nope, teachers are staying because they can rely you know, on the steady income that their current role is going to afford them. Some people saying the economy is turning around, and that means new paths are going to be open to all of our dissatisfied educators. The fact is, we can't take one broad statement and say, this is what's going to happen. And we certainly can't take national data that's not even going to be available for many years and say, yep, that's how it's going to inform and change what's going on in our district. What you need to pay attention to are the specific measures that you're seeing in your district around year over year, what that attraction looks like, but also what that retention looks like. Are people changing roles within district? Are people leaving roles entirely? Are your pools getting narrower? Are they changing and who's showing up in those pools? Because quite simply, we can't wait to take some kind of blanketed knowledge to say, yep, this is how the trends are looking, and so that's going to change our strategy. We all know it has to be much more nuanced than that. Historical data does seem to indicate that even though we won't be able to say anything will be felt across the board, there are likely some specific trends, and some people are already starting to report this across districts, that subjects like special education, mathematics, science, as well as school districts with lots of low-income students, we are going to see a shift and a higher need in those areas. Again, this is early data that's coming out. By no means is it meant to say, yep, this is locked in, and they should be informed by your unique particularities. One thing that I do think is important in thinking about this forecast, though, and I'll point to this study here. This came out of EdWeek, a survey of teachers that were asked about, are you going to leave? And when they said that, that's that 27% likelihood that you'll leave teaching. 27% said, you know, it's very unlikely. And then again, we don't have the pre-data on this because no one was ready or anticipated running into the pandemic. But the question asked, if you had been asked, you know, 2 years earlier, would you have left? 47% reporting that, oh yeah, in that case, it would have been very unlikely. So there are some changes that are coming out. But again, I want to underscore the note that the fallout from the pandemic, those statistics aren't immediately available to us, and they won't be for a while. So it's important to make sure we're paying attention to our unique circumstances and how folks and numbers are starting to indicate a shift in need. So to that end, we want to pause. We want to hear from you all and open up to discussion to talk a little bit about what you might already be seeing in your specific context. So question 1 here, what trends are you already seeing or have you and your team started to anticipate seeing once teachers return for next year? And relatedly, how are you and your team starting to respond? Would love to know what people are thinking.
So in Kansas City Public Schools, I mean, we're seeing the same trends that everybody's seeing across the nation. We just now received another math resignation. I'm down 7 math teachers, and I've already started telling principals, start creating a plan. Can you collapse these classes? Do you have somebody in mind for a long-term sub? You know, we've looked at reaching out to people in the corporate world and things, but you know, right now education's taken a hit. So, and responding, I mean, what we're doing, and we were able to hire our retention coach. I've just been able to bring on a new recruiter. So just really getting our team up to speed, and then, you know, trying to think creatively and outside the box with my new brain power that I'm bringing on board.
Appreciate that, Monica. Richie, I saw you come off mute as well.
Yeah, I mean, she loves to speak for me. So I love it. But yeah, just to piggyback on what Monica's saying, we're trying to put some preventatives in place, especially in the social and emotional support of our teachers, as well as employees in the district in general. I figure if we get out in front of the stress, right, we can try to prevent some of those things from happening as well. I mean, as it relates to people leaving. And so those are some factors that we are putting in place to respond to that.
Yeah, appreciate that. Others who are starting to or anticipate seeing some change or consistency in what your scenario feels like as teachers return, or thoughts about how you and your team might begin to respond? Yeah, it's very true, Tim. It is certainly a year-round responsibility at this time as we think about making sure that, especially going into this next year, a lot of people I've been speaking with have mentioned that the return isn't really as guaranteed when we're working through the summer, and that more than ever they feel like they're actively trying to make sure that they have people in their pipeline, that they have paths for hiring, and it's not seen as this like drop in the spring calendar, but it's truly an ongoing and consistent process.
I think for us, we're seeing and hearing a lot of anxiety about, because our district has been hybrid or remote for the whole year. So we are returning to fully in-person learning. So we are seeing a lot of anxiety from our teachers who are saying, you know, we are going to be dealing primarily with the social emotional aspect of return to school. You know, we can't even imagine, you know, dealing with the academic piece for at least the first several months. And, you know, from my role as the director of recruitment, you know, we have seen a lot of teachers leave for suburban districts. We're a large urban district, and we're seeing a lot of teachers who are just sort of saying, you know, I'm choosing to go to a suburban district where they have been back to in-person learning for at least part of the year. I think this is too big of a lift for this return. So, you know, I'm trying to fill these gaps, fill these high needs areas, and convey to our team that, you know, that not only is recruitment a year-round effort, but that recruitment is not solely the work of human capital, that, you know, all of us have a level of responsibility for this work, and that what we all do and what we all say and the actions that we take either promote or dissuade, you know, folks from either coming to or not coming to our district. So I think there's just a lot of moving parts. And I think, the decision that we made to not come back to in-person learning is sort of influencing what's happening right now, and how we're responding to that, both from a social, emotional, and academic and a recruitment standpoint. So it's a really unique time.
Yeah, I think that's such a great point, Nicole. And I just want to piggyback on what you mentioned about it being such a shared responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
When you think about a teacher who would have walked into a classroom 2 years ago, as opposed to this upcoming fall, and what it means to be able to provide for the social emotional needs of all the students who are moving into this setting, right, that's been so absent for them for so long, or maybe who are for the very first time walking into it, that's a different skill set. And there are different things that teachers are going to have in their minds about how to provide for that. And it can't be on the role of saying, yep, we need that different skill set. It's got to be on the development side for those teachers as well. And realizing that it isn't something that can be done in respective silos, but rather has to be a teamed approach, because then you could, right, I'm sure we all know, run the risks of those teachers walking in being like, oh, didn't realize this was going to be the challenge. And here we are hiring again shortly after. I know we've got a lot to share. So for time, I might move us to apply, but I invite people to continue dropping things in the chat if you didn't get a chance to share right there, but I'm excited to dive into part 2 of the combo. Pass it back to you, Daniel. And you're muted.
Thanks, Baltazar. So want to acknowledge, while we may not directly address some of the pipeline challenges that were just noted, we do know that nearly a third of teachers leave in their first 5 years, and there's kind of competing statistics around if that's more than a third or less than a third, but it's somewhere in that range. In our focus today, as well as this series, which we hope that you'll continue on, it's just really on how we can get better data on needs out of the gate. So that you can position both the district or your school to make both more informed in hiring decisions, but also position you to improve the teacher experience right out of the gate and target their onboarding and their initial development around the needs that are identified. So we hope that this is an approach that helps seal some of these leaks that we are experiencing in the foundations of our teacher retention. So I'm going to go ahead and move us into the apply portion of today's topic. And as a first step of thinking about this candidate profile and how you can use it as a tool for retention, we suggest starting by identifying and revisiting the knowledge, the skills, the mindsets of an employee within your organization and the role itself. So this we're going to talk specifically for teachers, but this can be a mindset or a framework that can be applied in a variety of roles. You might use this Venn diagram to the right, or we use the Venn diagram to the right, because these are not mutually exclusive components. And just some things to consider as you can create this list within your org. You might think about what are the top attributes of current performers. What are key culture drivers of your organization, key mindsets? What are anticipated future needs of this role? What are skills or attributes that you specifically need to deepen or add to your team? So starting with really brainstorming this list of knowledge, skills, and mindsets and thinking about where those live. You might want to anchor those in something such as state standards or teacher evaluation rubric, although there's kind of competing perspectives around how closely those might tie to the specific attributes of the profile. So it might look something like this here, and this is just a few common examples. So knowledge, things like content or grade level, knowledge or experience, maybe a knowledge around tier 1 instruction, PBIS, skills, things like classroom management, differentiation, relationship building, right now very prevalent virtual instruction skills. And then mindsets, things like growth mindset or high expectations, values around collaboration, or caring for the whole person. So these are just a few common examples. Would love if you have others that what else comes to mind when you look across this table. Feel free to add to the chat, and we can think about those examples too as we go through this exercise. But again, we just recommend by starting as a starting place, really creating that list of knowledge, skills, and mindsets. Next, we just think about considering how these attributes can be categorized into different buckets of foundational or functional competencies. So foundational might be the attributes or are the attributes for success in your organization regardless of role. So these are often things like mindsets that are connected to culture drivers. So some examples here: teamwork or initiative, communication. Functional competencies, these are going to be specific skills or skill areas that are really role specific. Things like lesson planning or instructional coaching expertise. The general recommendation, kind of industry standard, is try to build a profile that's 2/3 functional and 1/3 foundational. Functional are typically coachable and observable. Foundation are more inherent and interpretable. And we place just a heavier weight on the role itself, those functional competencies, than the organizational competencies. So generally, again, recommendation is 2/3 functional, 1/3 foundational, although it's certainly an art and not a science. And so you can see that here again, just breaking those out across the examples that I shared at the start here. We might think about these 5 here on the right as our functional, and these 3 competencies here on the left as really foundational org-wide competencies. Kind of the second key step here is defining these competencies. Detailing the specific tasks or behaviors so that they can be really easily understood by anyone who reads them, and also be measurable within your interview process. So just an example here on the right of team building, this foundational competency. You might be, those examples might be working across departments or helping colleagues outside of the immediate working group they're in, gathering or evidence of gathering continuous feedback on how colleagues could work together more cohesively, responding constructively to others' ideas and suggestions, encouraging active participation or cooperation within the team. So just getting clear on what those look-fors are, and again, written in a way that is really clear and observable by anyone who reads them. And then you generally go through each of these competencies and try to build out that clear working definition. And the third step here is to think about actually building out the profile itself and the working scorecard that you can use throughout the hiring process. So we think about this in terms of mastery and impact. So we recommend start by ranking your listed knowledge, skills, and mindsets, those competencies, by how immediately you might require mastery. So are they required? Would mastery be required by day 1 of the job, or by the start of year 2? And just actually laying those out along that scale of where you think they fall. So something like differentiation, that might be a skill that you're looking for in teachers as they progress, versus classroom management, really an upfront skill. You need it on day 1. It's a priority for everyone that you bring in and immediately begin to onboard. The second part of this matrix is ranking your competencies by your training capacity. And this is going to be like the experience, the resources, the personnel that you have in place to develop an employee on that specific component. And so we recommend just taking these that you've placed along that x-axis and actually now moving them up or down based on the training capacity of your organization. So you might say, we really have high training capacity for differentiation. We've got a lot of PD and resources and coaching around that. But something like growth mindset is, something we think about more inherently as a value, but it's not something we specifically coach or have resources around. So actually moving those variables up and down based on the level of training capacity within your organization. And then you can use those placements to help you determine the weights. So you can take a look at this scale right here. The top right quadrant would need maximum weight and clear communication on what would be expected on day 1. The bottom left would be the lowest weighting. Those could be scaffolded across the year 1 onboarding process. The top left and bottom right quadrants are going to receive medium level weights, and they might drive considerations around where you need to seek additional support or what you need to make sure gets included in pre-service trainings. And so what this can help you do, depending on where you placed your place those competencies, is actually to build out those weights themselves. So you actually just start with a value of 100, and you can place those along each attribute so that it totals out, but that you're weighting those appropriate to, again, the training capacity and the immediacy of the mastery itself. And so the attributes that we've been using as a sample might fall something like this here. And of course, those descriptions would be complete as well. So just some next steps here as you think about building that scorecard or sort of that profile. The next step is actually to build a scorecard that you can use within your interview process to evaluate and get a sense of where every candidate stands along those variables, and again, weighted by their importance for day one. To actually align your interview process to assess those attributes according to weights. So you're going to lean into the interview process on certain attributes over others. And then to plan your employee pre-service and year one onboarding plans to incorporate needs identified in the candidate assessment so that you have a more tailored, personalized, individualized development plan for every individual, and that you have better data as a district around what your new employees need when they go through their year 1-2 onboarding with your organization. And so if it's not clear yet, where we plan to go with this series is today we're really talking about the profile itself. And as we move on through part 2 and part 3, we'll be talking about how you do that alignment of the interview process, as well as how you think about personalizing the onboarding or designing more intentional onboarding based on the data that you collect from this candidate profile. And I'm going to hand it back to Baltazar here as we engage in conversation around this.
Yeah, so just a couple of framing questions that we're curious about. And folks who we've talked about with this work have always shared that this is a strategic commitment, right? To say, okay, we're going to go through the process of building this. And it'd be great if we could press pause on everything else and give our full attention to this. But we realize that is not a reality for any of us. And so some teams have shared, oh, I've worked on this piece of that, or we've done this, but we've never actually afforded the time and commitment to saying, what, we're going to build this out. And others who have said, yep, we kind of do this in a routine process, but we do it a different way. We would love to hear from you all as we continue to learn. How have you approached the work of building a candidate profile or pieces of that work with your team? Are there places you felt successful? Are there pains you've run into along the way? And is there anything regarding that that's really top of you and your team's mind right now that you're immediately focused on with regards to this work?
So just thinking about the work that we've done in Kansas City Public Schools, as far as our onboarding goes, I mean, we went back through and we totally revamped our onboarding with our new hires, but it's by no means, they don't leave with an individualized plan as far as like where we need to take them, from here. So, I mean, so that's like, that really is sticking in my mind, and how we can help them be more successful, thus retaining them in the process. So yeah, that's a thought that it's kind of spinning my head right now.
I'm curious, Monica, when you think about where the decision-making power falls in your district, how much of that lands within each school, and how much of that is shared as a larger district strategy?
I would say our curriculum and instruction team does a really good job of really leading and driving that piece of it. And then thinking about just the social emotional we have a student support system and just a support system that we put in place. And Richie, before becoming my retention coach, was a school counselor. So he was a part of that. So he's bringing a lot of that, but we have to really figure out like how he can move and what we can do with it. He's doing great things already, and he can share what he's doing and stuff at that point. But, but I still think about, there are things we do as a district, definitely, that drive our focus, but each of our schools are so unique across our district. We're a high diverse, and students on the northeast side of town look very different from the students on the south part of our district. So I do think it is driven by the schools as well. We do a thing where we meet twice a year with our principals, and we have a team, and we go through every one of our employees, so everybody at their school, and we look at how they're performing. And so principals have to say, well, they're really missing this piece. So then that's where we set and say, okay, well, then next steps are we hook them up with this person or that person. And, we make a game plan for them at that time, but that really doesn't occur until November. And then we meet again in January, February, to touch base again and see how they're all doing. I would say that's where it gets individualized, but like I said, we don't do that till November. Would we do better shooting that up?
Right. I appreciate that.
Mm-hmm.
How about others? What piece of this work or components of this work have you and your team approached, and where have you felt wins? Where have you felt some pain points? Or maybe you haven't approached this work before and there are some hurdles that are in the way.
I felt like I had this conversation with my chief the other day. We as human capital professionals, we sort of try to speak the language of academics because we feel a responsibility to ensure that we're placing people into our classrooms, into our buildings. But sometimes when our counterparts come to us, they say, I need a director of ELA, and they're sort of all over the place. They're not speaking the language of human capital, right? They need this and they need that. And we're like, but we need you to kind of give it to us in our language so that I can go out and recruit, the person that you need. And so, I think kind of when we talk about, that recruitment is everybody's responsibility. I was talking to Chris and I said, how do we attend professional development and we, sort of try to understand the language of education. How do we get educators to understand the language of human capital? How do I sit down with my chief academic officer and say, here's how you can frame what you need in the language of a job description? Or how do you frame the language of, and I feel like this is sort of kind of helping me. So if I can get, help frame a candidate profile, maybe this is what's going to help me work with our teaching and learning team so that, we can very easily put together a candidate profile, to sort of put us on the same page. So I feel like that's a pain point because they're asking for something and they have something in their head that they're not communicating to me in a language that I'm understanding, in the respect of a human resources perspective of a job, candidate profile or a job description. So that's a pain point for me. So I think, this is going to be very helpful for us as we move forward, to say, well, let's create a candidate profile together, and I can translate that into a job description and to, whether it's a an ad or a posting or something like that.
Yeah, I think that's such an important point, Nicole. It makes me think of when the very first teaching position I was ever placed in, I went through an alternate certification program. And I remember sitting in this big hall with a bunch of other new hires, and teacher, Miss Mack, who ended up at the same school as I, sat down next to me, and we were going through this presentation from the personnel department. And she was like, I was so confused by what was being said. I was like, none of this has come up in any of my like training or preparation. She was like, none of this matters, click that, do this, yep. And then when we get to the school, like, then we'll talk about what you really need to do.
Right.
And I was like, sure, that sounds fine, because none of this makes sense. Like, even if I wanted to make sense of it, it doesn't communicate to me what it means to be in a classroom and to be ready and to do it right. And having that chance, you know, when we say there's this huge strategic side of building the candidate profile, the value of the team you bring together to build that candidate profile with your teachers who are in the roles, with your coaches and your principals who are in the roles of developing those teachers to really make it resonate and make it sound like what it is from the day-to-day for teachers is so paramount to making sure that we're actually building a system that gets people in places where they can land and grow and stay.
And I think it's so important to say, like, from a human capital perspective, that it's important for me to understand the work that you do, you know, on the teaching and learning side.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I think when it comes to something like developing a profile and how that informs interviews and how that informs onboarding, we see very different levels of autonomy across districts. So you might have a district that develops the whole process start to finish and is really prescriptive. You know, the whole organization really follows that. You might have an organization that we're supporting right now where the district builds the profile, but the school really determines how that gets applied in the interview and then how that drives their individual onboarding. And you have other districts where they're really just giving the guardrails to schools. You know, we expect that you have a clear profile, that it is part of this process and that it drives. So just kind of giving the overview and schools fill that in. I think no matter what the approach is, and that's going to vary based on size or leadership styles or things like that, you do need shared philosophies and language, which, Nicole, is what you're suggesting around who you hire, how you assess, and what you do in onboarding. And I think that's where, you know, a lot of value can be or is needed in this work and across organizations.
I know we're running close on time, so maybe I'll just put in a last call there if folks wanted to share anything, but I wanted to make sure that we had a chance to share in our closeout how we can make sure that everyone has both access to this information, but also knows how you can be a part of part 2 and part 3 in this discussion, because they truly are closely tied together. Great, that's great to hear, Ashley. Maybe we'll go ahead and pass it back to you, Daniel, and we can do our quick wrap up. Yep, take your time.
All right.
And thanks, Tim. I noticed you dropped the registration link down there. If anybody hasn't seen that in the chat, that's there, so you can make sure and be a part of the next ones.
Awesome. Well, again, thank you all for being here today. And I know it was you know, a little bit of sprint there as we you know, had a little bit of a late start. So we hope that you know, you're able to engage with the content today. That today was, again, our focus is on targeting talent and thinking about how a candidate profile can act as a foundation. Our next session will be with AAEE is actually on August 5th. So I've updated these dates. Will be on how do you leverage a profile to drive a more structured interview process. Again, this will be built off this session, but it'll also be standalone. So if you have other people that you'd like to invite or share the word, we encourage anyone to come along. And then our August 26th session will be how do you tie that all together and more intentionally and target your onboarding. So we hope that you'll join us again August 5th. And just again, what's next? This is actually, again, there's a little bit of confusion here, so I'm sorry for the crossing of hairs. Our next session, the Ed Elements version, will be on July 20th. The AA-EE, August 5th. Come to either one, come to both. We'd love to see you and engage. And we'll share a quick closing survey if you have a moment. We'd love to just get any feedback. So we'll put that in the chat right now. And with that, if you can complete that, otherwise we'll send you on your way. And thank you so much again for being here this afternoon.
Yeah, thank you all so much. Tim, anything you want to close out with?
Yeah, thank you, Tim, or Baltazar.
Thank you guys so much. It's fantastic discussion. Appreciate the interactivity, and just want to again remind everybody that registration is in the chat for the next session. We haven't quite set up the registration for the third session that we'll be hosting on August 26th, but we'll have that done soon. Also, there is for those who might be interested, next week on the 20th of July, we will be hosting a session with Career Eco regarding virtual job job fair platforms entitled Leveraging Technology to Complete Your Recruitment Toolkit. So give that some consideration as well. But thank you so much, Baltazar and Daniel, for your time today.
Thank you all.
Thank you guys.
Much.